Tuesday night in Dayton. Spaghetti on the table, store bread warming in the oven, a bag salad in a plastic bowl. I got home from Columbus early because intake at the recruiting station wrapped ahead of schedule. Mom sat at the head, posture straight, napkin squared. Dad took the chair by the kitchen doorway. Kaylin and her boyfriend Ty slid in late, still on his phone. I served plates because that's what I do here. Sauce, noodles, Parmesan. I know who likes what. No one asked how the day went. Forks clicked. The television was muted. Then Kaylin said, calm as reading a grocery list, "We just want to live without you." She looked right at me. Ty stared at his bread. Mom watched the salt shaker. Dad picked at a chip in his mug. 4 people at a table, and the sentence sat there. I didn't ask who we meant. The membership was seated. I didn't cry, not because I'm unbreakable. It's because the line sounded practiced, and when a line is practiced, you know arguing won't change it. I took a breath and said, okay. Kaylin kept going. This house works better when you're at the office or on duty. You make everything tight. It's like you're auditing us. I'm not auditing you, I said. I pay half the rent and cover the bills that go late. My voice stayed even. Facts don't need volume. Mom set down her fork. Let's not fight. No one's fighting, I said. Ty cleared his throat. No offense, she's just saying what everyone's thinking. I looked at my plate. The food was fine. My appetite clocked out. 10 months of driving, I 70. Wearing a uniform most days and jeans on others, teaching civilians that logistics isn't magic, none of that mattered here. I wasn't angry. I was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Kaylin said, "This isn't personal. We just want space. We live in a 3-bedroom rental with a yard that floods when it rains an hour. Space isn't the problem. Boundaries are." I stood, picked up my plate, walked to the trash. I didn't slam anything. I scraped the pasta into the can, rinsed the dish, set it in the rack. I wasn't performing. I was cleaning up. "Don't worry," I said, turning off the water. "You'll get what you want." Mom exhaled. Sloan. I dried my hands on the towel that smells like lemon cleaner. "I heard you," I said. Dad tried a soft line. "Maybe we talk later." "Sure," I said. I am good at yes. I took my glass to the counter. My hands were steady. I checked for the little tremor that shows when caffeine meets reality. Nothing. I felt like a checklist. Dish, check. Counter, check. Heartbeat, check. I didn't check their faces. I knew what was on them. Relief that I wasn't making them explain themselves. I went upstairs. The hallway light was out. It's been out for 2 weeks. The stepladder lives behind the mower, which lives behind other things, which means it never gets moved unless I move it. I used my phone flashlight, passed the guest room, that is my room when labels change, lifted my door a half-inch so the old frame wouldn't squeal, and went in. Bed made, uniform hung, duffel half-packed from last weekend's drill support. I took off my shoes and sat. No music, no television, no calls. I've learned not to expect other people to fix a bad night. I looked at the ceiling and organized the next 72 hours. First, get through tonight without breaking anything, including me. Second, review the lease addendum. My name is on it because Mom said the landlord would be more comfortable. Third, check the calendar for Mom's physical therapy so I don't strand her. If I go, I won't leave chaos. I will stop catching it. My phone buzzed. "Nadia, you alive?" "Oh, 530? I typed back. Yes. She's blunt. It helps. Bottom desk drawer, a stack of receipts and screenshots since last fall. Rent transfers, utilities, Walgreens runs, co-pays, all the invisible work that looks like nothing until it stops. I changed into a t-shirt and sweats and washed my face. The bathroom mirror has a chip in the corner from a hanger slip last winter. Every time I see it, I mean to fix it. Then something else gets priority. Problems wait for me. Downstairs, a cabinet closed. The television murmured, then went quiet. No one came up. You don't unload a line like that and then check in. You finish dinner and return to your evening. People are good at moving on when the change belongs to someone else. I set my alarm for 0445. I wasn't writing a speech. I wasn't planning a scene. I was counting resources. The part of me that runs supply lines at work works fine. The part of me that acts like a supply line here is done. One of those parts gets to keep operating. The AC kicked on. The vent clicked twice. I turned on my side and looked at the duffel. The zipper tab got bent by a baggage handler in Kuwait 2 years ago. It still zips. Not everything needs fixing to work. I closed my eyes. I didn't ask for patience or revenge. I didn't wish for a different family. I counted breaths like I do before a ruck. In through the nose, out through the mouth, steady. The body takes orders even when the mind files a complaint. I kept breathing, steady. Footsteps passed the hall and faded. Ty's car started. Mom's steps crossed the hallway and back. Dad coughed on the stairs. The house settled into its version of night. I stayed where I was and let the room hold. A sentence got said at a table. It doesn't need a replay. I don't need to audition for a better reaction. I can note what was said and act accordingly. The alarm hit at 4:45, and I rolled out of bed before the second buzz. Cold water on my face, uniform laid out the night before, shoes tied, laces double knotted. The house was dark, the kitchen smelled faintly of garlic from last night's spaghetti, and the sink still had plates I didn't wash. I walked past them and didn't care. By 5:10, I pulled into the gym lot at the Reserve Center in Columbus. The lights were already on, and Nadia leaned against her car, sipping gas station coffee. She didn't ask how I slept. She tossed me the spare bottle of water she always brings, and I caught it. We hit the mats for warm-ups. Jumping jacks, push-ups, burpees. My body followed orders, but my head kept replaying Kaylin's sentence. We just want to live without you. I almost laughed mid-plank because the delivery sounded like a bad HR memo. Nadia caught my slip and raised an eyebrow. You're off, she said. Didn't eat enough carbs? I lied. My voice cracked a little, and I hated it. She shrugged and counted the reps out loud. By the time we hit the pull-up bar, sweat had started to drip down my back, and my grip slipped. I pushed for one more, got halfway up, then blacked out for a second. I dropped hard on my heels and staggered. Nadia grabbed my arm. You good? Yeah. My chest burned. I sat down and drank half the water. My hands shook just enough for me to notice, but not enough for her to call it out. We finished the circuit slower. She didn't press. In the military, you learn when to shut up and when to poke. She gave me the courtesy of silence. After showering, I walked into my office space at the logistics wing. Stacks of binders, laptops, cargo schedules. I flipped through shipment manifests, highlighted discrepancies, fired off 3 emails. My inbox filled with copy and Roger that replies. Here, my words carried weight. No one pretended not to hear me. If I said something was off, people fixed it. At lunch, Nadia sat across from me at the cafeteria table, picking at chicken strips. You're running like you're carrying a bag of bricks, she said. I'm fine. You passed out on a pull-up. Not passed out, just lightheaded. She smirked. You're lying like a cadet who thinks I don't check reports. Then she let it go. That's the kind of mercy you appreciate. I ate half a sandwich, tossed the rest, and scrolled my phone. Mom had sent one text. Pick up milk? Nothing else. No check-in, no fallout from last night. Just milk. Kaylin didn't text. Ty didn't either. Silence. The kind that tells you you're not in the loop anymore. At 1,500, I ran a meeting with a civilian contractor who didn't know how to read our system codes. I explained 3 times, smiled like a pro, and when he finally nodded, I wrote the steps down for him. My patience is endless at work. It's rationed at home. By 1700, I was back on I-70, the sun sinking, the highway lined with billboards for fast food and personal injury lawyers. My head ached from too much fluorescent light. I pulled into the driveway at 6:30, and Kaylin's car was already there. She laughed at something Ty said as they unloaded grocery bags. They didn't pause when I walked past. Just one look from her, quick and sharp, like I was the neighbor, not the sister. Inside, Dad was watching sports with the sound low. Mom folded laundry at the table. No one mentioned yesterday. I took the milk out of the bag before Kaylin put it away. I got this already, I said, setting it in the fridge. She shrugged and opened chips. Dinner was microwave leftovers. I didn't join. I went upstairs, changed, logged into the finance app on my laptop, and checked balances. My military pay hit steady, my reserve bonus lined up. I tracked what I'd covered this month: utilities, groceries, gas, and stared at the totals. My contribution wasn't invisible. It was written in numbers. I lay back on my bed, phone in hand, scrolling. Pictures of units on deployment, birthdays I missed, people I only see in uniform, all those lives I manage better than my own family's. I caught myself wondering if maybe that was the joke, that I can move supplies across states but can't find a place at my own dinner table. At Nayan Trady, Nadia texted again. Tomorrow, don't faint. Wasn't fainting, I typed. Fine, don't repeat whatever it was. Deal. I set the phone down. My chest felt hollow. I thought about the look on Kaylin's face when she said it. No smirk, no anger, just flat. As if removing me was like dusting a shelf. That's what stung. Not drama, not screaming. Just clean dismissal. The house quieted. Mom's bedroom television clicked off. Dad's cough echoed once, then stopped. I stayed awake longer than I should, waiting for something to shift, for a knock, for a word. Nothing came. And when nothing comes, you start planning again. The next morning I left the house early, uniform sharp, duffel in the trunk, just to avoid the silence of breakfast. By the time I got back around 7 that night, Kaylin had already claimed the living room with Ty. They were watching a reality show too loud, the kind where people scream in kitchens. Shoes kicked off, soda cans on the table, my spot on the couch filled like it was never mine. I headed for the stairs when I heard my name. She's not even here half the time, Kaylin said. I stopped, halfway up. She didn't know I could hear through the vent shaft near the stairwell. Ty answered, Yeah, but her name's on the lease. That's the snag. She'll fold. She always folds. She's too military about it. Thinks rules are permanent. I didn't move. Just stood still, listening to the two of them talk about me like I was a malfunctioning appliance. The kind you replace when it finally stops working. Later that night, I found one of my workout tops crumpled in the laundry basket under Kaylin's new clothes. She doesn't even work out. She just wore it out somewhere and dumped it without asking. I folded it back, smooth lines, and put it in my drawer. Tiny thefts never stop. Friday, Mom asked if I could cover the electric bill, just this once. She said it soft, folding towels at the kitchen table, not making eye contact. I already knew I had paid it 2 weeks ago. I pulled up the receipt on my phone, slid it across to her. She smiled tight, nodded, and said, Must have slipped. No apology, just back to folding. Saturday, Dad borrowed my car without asking. Keys gone from the counter, vehicle missing from the driveway. I called his phone, no answer. He came back 4 hours later with a bag of takeout and said, Figured you wouldn't need it today. My gas tank told the story, half empty. It wasn't big betrayals. No smashed plates, no screaming fights. Just the kind of small cuts that bleed slower, but sink deeper. When you patch one, another opens. And people pretend you're overreacting because nothing looks dramatic from the outside. Sunday morning, I sat at the kitchen table drinking burnt coffee when Kaylin breezed in. She looked at the mail I'd sorted into neat stacks. Oh, good. You're still doing this, she said, picking up a letter and tossing it back down. Like I was hired help. You could sort your own mail, I said. She laughed. You're good at it. Don't get defensive. That was her move, turning my boundary into her joke. And the room always let it slide. By noon, Ty's shoes were in the hallway. Mom's purse was on the counter. Dad's baseball cap was on my chair. Every object reminded me, this house wasn't shared. It was occupied, and I was the outsider paying for the privilege. I started keeping track, not for revenge yet, but because logistics is how I survive. A notebook, clean pages, dates, small entries, paid water bill, no reimbursement. Car taken, no ask. Shirt used, no permission. Every entry quiet, factual like supply notes. I wasn't documenting feelings. I was documenting reality. That week, I overheard Kaylin on the phone with a friend. She laughed and said, She thinks she's in charge because she wears a uniform. At home, she's nothing. I stood outside my room door, listening, gripping the frame so tight my knuckles hurt. Then I walked in, sat on my bed, and stared at the blank wall until my breathing slowed. Anger's loud but short. Discipline is quiet and lasts longer. Work stayed clean. At the Reserve Center, I reviewed shipment timelines, checked in on drivers, coordinated with units 2 states away. People listened, they followed through. They respected my word. The contrast was almost funny how strangers trusted me with cargo worth millions, but my own sister couldn't trust me with the truth. One evening, I came home and found the television remote missing from the coffee table. Kaylin had it in her room. When I asked for it back, she said, "Relax, you can buy another one with your military paycheck." She said it like it was clever. I took the remote, said nothing, and walked upstairs. In my room, I closed the door, set the remote on the desk, and sat down. My notebook waited. Another line. Remote taken, comment made. I didn't add adjectives. I didn't need to. The facts would tell their own story. I looked around the room, at the uniform hung neat, the duffel ready, the bills filed. My life outside this house was order. Inside, it was erosion. And no one noticed because erosion doesn't make noise. It just takes pieces until the structure caves. I turned off the light and lay down, breathing slow. I didn't picture fights. I didn't picture revenge yet. I pictured the balance sheet in my head, the one that never lies. Something was stacking against them, and one day the weight would show. The printer in the living room whirred late on a Wednesday night. I was upstairs, reviewing logistics requests on my laptop, when the sound drifted up. No one prints at that hour unless it's last-minute homework or tax forms. I went down for water and saw Kaylin pulling pages out, shoving them into a folder. She looked up like I'd walked in on her stealing candy. "It's just work stuff," she said, tucking the papers fast. "Didn't ask," I replied and grabbed my water. But one page had slid onto the floor, halfway under the coffee table. She missed it in her rush. When she left, laughing on the phone, I picked it up. It wasn't homework. It wasn't bills. It was an email chain, printed by mistake, my name highlighted in yellow. "If she leaves, we can finally get the extra room. Ty says he can help with rent, but we just need her to go first." Another line. "Don't worry, she'll cave if we pressure her. She's too rigid. She won't fight." The sender, Kaylin, the recipients, Mom, Dad, Ty, all copied. The words looked sterile on the page, black ink, plain font, but it was a blueprint. They weren't waiting for me to mess up. They were planning my exit. I sat on the couch, holding the sheet like it was toxic. My chest went hot, then cold. I'd suspected, but suspicion is smoke. Proof is fire. I read it twice. They talked about shifting utilities, about who'd take my room, about how she'll find somewhere because she's military. She can always crash at a base if needed. Like I was a piece of gear they could store somewhere else. I slipped the page into my notebook upstairs. One more entry, except this one wasn't a small cut. This was surgical. The next morning, Mom asked if I could pick up her prescription. She said it sweetly, as if last night's words didn't exist. I drove her, waited, paid the copay. My receipt joined the stack. That evening, Dad mentioned how the landlord might be willing to adjust the lease if things change. He said it casually, eyes on the television. I nodded like it meant nothing. My head recorded it word for word. Kaylin bragged on the phone to a friend that things will open up soon. She didn't notice I was in the kitchen doorway, hearing every syllable. The funny part? They thought they were subtle. They thought manipulation works like whispers in the dark. But military training teaches you to listen past noise. You hear what matters. You connect dots. I looked at them differently now. Not with shock burns out quick, but with calculation. They weren't fumbling into betrayal. They were drafting it. That made my response easier. At work, I printed manifests, stamped approvals, signed my name under things worth real money. Nobody second-guessed me there. Nobody highlighted my name like a problem to remove. Back home, I watched the pattern tighten. Kaylin forgot to include me in a grocery run. Dad forgot to tell me about a family dinner invite from relatives. Mom forgot to pass along a phone call. Every forget was a stitch in the same fabric. The printed page in my drawer didn't accuse. It confirmed. I didn't rant. I didn't confront. I let them believe I was still blind. One night, Kaylin left her laptop open at the counter while she ran upstairs. An email draft sat half-typed. "If she signs off, we'll be fine. Don't worry, Ty, it's happening." I didn't touch the keys. I didn't need more evidence. I had enough to know the direction. Upstairs, my notebook grew. I slid the printed page between receipts and bills. Not a diary, a case file. Quiet, factual, undeniable. I lay down that night, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, the air vent clicking. The paper in the drawer pulsed in my mind. Not because of what it said, but because of what it proved. They weren't waiting to see if I'd leave. They were building the exit and handing me the script. I turned on my side, closed my eyes, and let my breathing even out. If they thought I wouldn't fight, they weren't entirely wrong. I wouldn't fight their way. I'd fight mine. The following week, I didn't stop buying groceries, I just stopped buying theirs. No more extra cereal Kaylin liked, no more soda. Ty guzzled. No more snacks that vanished from the pantry. My cart shrank to lean meats, oats, protein powder, coffee. The kind of things nobody else in the house touched. When Mom opened the fridge and asked why we were low on milk, I said, "I figured you or Kaylin had it covered this week." She blinked, smiled too quick, and said, "Right. Of course." She didn't argue. She just added it to her own list. Utilities were next. I kept paying my share. Exactly my share. I set the auto pay to cover 1/4. No more rounding up, no more covering accidents when someone missed a deadline. When the gas company emailed about a late fee, Mom mentioned it at dinner. "Strange, they're saying we're short." I pulled the bill up on my phone. "My part's already paid. Maybe check with Kaylin." Then I bit into chicken and didn't elaborate. The silence sat thick until Kaylin muttered, "I'll handle it." Then, Dad looked up from his plate, brows furrowed, but he didn't say a word. He knew what was happening. He just didn't step in. At work, Nadia noticed the shift in me. I wasn't dragging anymore. I had purpose. Revenge doesn't have to be fireworks. Sometimes it's math. "You're calmer," she said one morning after PT, handing me a towel. "I'm consistent," I replied. "Whatever you call it. You're not wobbling on the bar anymore." That made me smirk. She didn't need to know the details. My body was steady because my plan was steady. By the second week, Kaylin asked if I could spot her gas money. I laughed, not mean, just short. "Can't. Tight budget." She stared at me like I'd switched languages. I'd always been the fallback. Ty started leaving later in the mornings, probably because his rides with Kaylin burned more gas. I heard them in the driveway one night, bickering. "She used to cover it," Ty said. "Well, she's not anymore," Kaylin snapped. I stood by my window, looking down at their shadows, not smug, not gloating, just recording. One more line in my mental ledger. Pressure applied, cracks forming. Mom asked me quietly if I'd at least keep paying the internet because your dad needs it for sports. I said, "Sure, my fourth." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. The thing about money is it doesn't scream. It whispers. The lights stay on but the cushion disappears. The house felt tighter, less comfortable, and none of it could be pinned on me. I wasn't withholding. I was balancing. Saturday, Kaylin complained there wasn't enough left for takeout. Dad said maybe they should cook more at home. Mom said she was tired. I said nothing, eating my eggs, drinking my coffee. In the evenings, I sat in my room with spreadsheets open, adjusting numbers. Rent split evenly, utilities divided, groceries tracked. I could account for every dollar I touched. They couldn't. That was the difference. The tension built slow, like water filling a glass. No shouting, no direct blame. Just glances across the table, sighs in the hallway, whispers I didn't need to lean in to catch. They wanted me out, but the math was keeping them cornered. Kaylin's birthday rolled around, and for the first time, I didn't buy a gift. At dinner, she opened presents from Mom, Dad, and Ty. She looked at me expectantly. I sipped water and said, "Happy birthday." Her face cracked just slightly before she smiled tight. "Thanks." Later, Mom asked why I hadn't gotten her anything. I shrugged. Didn't think she needed more stuff. That ended the conversation. In the military, we're trained to know when to push and when to hold. I wasn't exploding. I was tightening the screws. Every day, one more degree. And I noticed something else. The house itself began to feel different. The pile of shoes by the door looked sloppy. The chipped mug in the sink looked permanent. The television blaring reality shows sounded cheap. When you stop subsidizing dysfunction, it starts to look like what it is. By the third week, The late notices stacked on the counter. Kaylin grumbled. Dad sighed. Mom asked if anyone had called the company. I stayed quiet, stirring my coffee. Finally, Ty said, "We'll figure it out." I wrote another clean line in my notebook that night. Support retracted, system destabilizing. No one accused me directly. They couldn't. I hadn't broken a single rule. I just stopped patching their holes. The house creaked with the weight of its own cracks. And I sat steady, breathing even, waiting for the next shift in pressure. One Thursday afternoon, I sat in my car outside the Reserve Center. Engine off, papers spread across the steering wheel. The air smelled like hot asphalt, windows rolled halfway down. I wasn't thinking about dinner or chores. I was thinking about the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the SCRA. It had started with a casual conversation at work. Nadia mentioned she'd used the law when she got orders out of state. She'd broken a lease penalty-free, no questions asked. "It's one of the only perks they can't wiggle around," she said. "You should keep it in your back pocket." So, I did more than keep it. I studied it. The act was clear. Active duty or reservists on certain orders had the right to terminate leases. No penalty, no retaliation. All it took was paperwork and proper notice. My situation wasn't a deployment, but the clause extended further than most landlords realized. And Joe Bramley, our landlord, wasn't the type to fight a military exemption. He respected uniforms. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. I opened my laptop, pulled the lease from my email archives, and highlighted every section that mattered. The rent split, the renewal date, the signatures. My name was first on the line. Without me, the whole document wobbled. Then I drafted a letter. Formal. Straightforward. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, I am exercising my right to terminate my obligation to this lease. I added the statute reference. I included my orders. I printed 3 copies. The next day, I drove to Joe's office. His property management sign hung crooked on the brick wall, but the blinds inside were open. He looked up as I entered, glasses low on his nose. "Captain Whitaker," he said, standing to shake my hand. He always addressed me by rank once he learned it. Never miss, never ma'am, always captain. Respect embedded in syllables. "Mr. Bramley," I said, handing him the folder. "This is notice of termination under the SCRA." End of folder. He skimmed the first page, nodded slowly, then set it down. "I've dealt with this before. Everything looks in order. I'll sign the release today." No hesitation. No pushback. Just clean acknowledgement. Relief washed over me, not the kind that makes you smile, but the kind that steadies your heartbeat. I wasn't trapped. The law was on my side, and the landlord was cooperative. We signed the paperwork, each signature crisp. He handed me the stamped copy. "You've got 60 days. Keys back by then. No penalty, no balance owed." I shook his hand again, firm grip. "Thank you for your professionalism." "Thank you for your service," he replied. And for once it didn't sound like a canned line. Back in my car, I laid the papers on the passenger seat. Proof, authority, freedom. I didn't rush home to wave it in their faces. That wasn't the move. The power of the document wasn't in brandishing it. It was in knowing I could leave on my terms. That evening, Kaylin asked if I could drive her to Ty's because her car needed a break. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Number." She blinked, surprised. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. Just no. Then I walked upstairs. Later, Mom knocked on my door and asked if I'd thought about helping with rent a little more since you're stable. I opened my drawer, touched the papers inside, and simply said, "I already do my part." Her face tightened, but she didn't argue. The legal shield gave me more than a way out. It gave me clarity. Every word they spoke now, every scheme they plotted, slid right off. Because I knew the ending wasn't theirs to write. At the Reserve Center, Nadia noticed the difference. "You're grinning more," she said after a run. "Am I?" I hadn't even noticed. "You've got that look like you've already won something, and you're just waiting for the scoreboard to catch up." I laughed under my breath. She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, the house's financial cracks deepened. Kaylin snapped at Ty about bills. Dad grumbled about cable costs. Mom asked for small loans from relatives. They thought pressure would break me. Instead, it was circling back on them. I still cooked my meals, still folded my uniforms, still logged receipts in my notebook, but now, between entries, I'd glance at the folder with the signed release. A shield, sitting quietly, waiting. No one in the house knew yet. And that secrecy was its own kind of strength. The less they knew, the more control I had. Every night, as I lay down, I imagined the sound of a door clicking shut behind me, not slammed, not dramatic, just closed. And the silence afterward wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen to grab coffee, uniform shirt tucked but unbuttoned, hair still damp from the shower. Kaylin stood at the counter pouring cereal into a bowl she hadn't rinsed from the night before. Ty lounged at the table scrolling on his phone like he lived there rent-free, which, technically, he did. When I reached for the mug, Kaylin smirked without looking up. "You're always so serious. You know, if you don't like how things are around here, you could just go." The spoon clinked against her bowl. My hand froze on the mug handle. "What did you say?" My voice wasn't raised. It was low, flat. She finally looked at me, shoulders squared like she was testing the weight of her own words. "Why don't you just go? Nobody asked you to stay." Ty chuckled under his breath, eyes still on the screen. Mom shuffled in with a laundry basket, pretending she hadn't heard, but her silence was its own verdict. Dad's chair creaked in the living room, no footsteps coming to intervene. I poured the coffee, steady hand, no splash. "Noted," I said, and walked out. In the military, confrontation isn't loud. It's direct. But at home, their version was bait little hooks tossed in casual sentences, waiting for me to bite. This time, the bait was obvious. Kaylin wanted me to snap, to validate the story she was spinning about me being rigid, impossible, the problem. Instead, I drank my coffee and sat on the porch, notebook on my lap. I wrote one line, "Kaylin, why don't you just go? Facts, not feelings." By afternoon, the air in the house was brittle. Kaylin stomped around upstairs. Ty slammed cabinets looking for snacks. Mom hummed too loud as she folded laundry. Dad asked who had moved his cat from the couch, like that was the house's biggest crisis. At dinner, silence filled the table. Chicken, potatoes, store-brand soda. Kaylin stabbed her fork into the food and finally said, "We're all just stressed. Things would be easier if space was freed up." Mom dabbed her mouth with a napkin, eyes lowered. Dad cleared his throat but said nothing. Ty shoveled potatoes. Chewing like this was just background entertainment. I put my fork down, deliberate. "You want me to leave? Say it clearly." No one met my eyes. Kaylin smirked. "I just did." The clink of silverware, the hum of the fridge, the weight of unspoken agreement, all of it pressed in. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just picked up my plate, rinsed it, and went upstairs. In my room, I opened the drawer with the folder from Bramley. The legal release lay crisp inside. I touched the corner of the paper. Power doesn't need to be shown to be real. That night, while the house settled, I sat cross-legged on the bed scrolling through base schedules. A drill was coming up in 2 weeks. Perfect timing. The SCRA paperwork would line up clean with my obligations. Logistics, the one language they didn't speak, was the language that would end this. But even with the plan solid, emotion bled through. I wasn't stone. I was human. Hearing your own sister frame you as disposable cuts in a way bullets don't. In uniform, I was Captain Whitaker, respected, dependable, trusted. At this table, I was just the problem. I lay back, staring at the ceiling fan creaking overhead, and thought, they want me gone, and they'll get exactly what they want. Just not how they pictured it. The next morning, Kaylin passed me in the hallway, shoulder brushing mine harder than necessary. "Don't look so tense," she muttered. "It's not that deep." I smiled faintly, calm, almost amused. "Oh, it's deep enough." She blinked, thrown off by the calmness. She expected me to bite. Instead, I walked on, uniform pressed, boots clean, notebook tucked in my bag. At work, Nadia noticed again. "Your jaw's tighter," she said during PT. "Family stuff," I admitted, wiping sweat from my forehead. "You going to deal with it?" she asked, half teasing, half serious. "Already am," I said and left it there. That night, I came home to find Ty in my chair in the living room. Legs stretched out, shoes on the coffee table. He glanced at me, smirked, and didn't move. Kaylin flipped channels on the remote, deliberately ignoring me. I looked at the scene for exactly 3 seconds, then turned, walked upstairs, and shut my door. Some fights aren't worth a drop of energy when you already hold the trump card. Behind the door, the house noise muffled. I sat at my desk, pulled out the notebook, and wrote, "Confrontation escalated. Emotional control maintained." Then I slid the pen back, closed the book, and exhaled steady. Control wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, even in silence. Especially in silence. When I pulled into the base parking lot at 0500, the morning air was sharp enough to sting my lungs. I liked it that way. Pain at least reminded me I was alive, not stuck in that house where every word weighed more than a rucksack. I walked into the gym, uniform sweats on, boots laced tight. The smell of rubber mats and chalk dust was a relief. No one there cared about Kaylin's snide comments or Ty's freeloading. They only cared if you could push, pull, and run your numbers. I grabbed the barbell, chalked my hands, and started reps. Heavy, steady, mechanical. Halfway through, my arms gave out. The bar clanged too loud, rolling forward, almost catching my shin. I dropped to my knees, chest heaving, sweat burning my eyes. For the first time in weeks, the mask cracked. My body wasn't failing because of weight. It was failing because my mind was split between war at home and duty here. I leaned against the bench, head down, trying to breathe it off. "You good, Whitaker?" Sergeant Mendoza asked from across the room, towel around his neck. "Fine," I lied, wiping my face. "You don't look fine. You look like somebody running 2 marathons at once." I forced a laugh, weak. "Maybe I am." He didn't push. He just nodded. "Remember, nobody wins a war by themselves. Even generals delegate." When he walked off, the words sat heavy. He was right. But what team did I have at home? My squad there was silent at best, hostile at worst. After showering, I sat in the locker room alone, staring at my reflection in the scratched metal mirror. My face looked harder than it had months ago, jaw set, lines deeper, eyes sharper. But the truth was, I felt fragile. Like if anyone asked the right question, I'd break. By noon, I was back in my room staring at the wall. I didn't cry often, but that day, I let it out. Not loud, not messy, just silent tears soaking my pillow. The kind of tears you don't admit to anyone because they'd use them as ammo. Minutes passed, then maybe hours. Eventually, I sat up, wiped my face, and forced myself to focus. Soldiers adapt. That's the rule. If the battlefield shifts, you don't curl up. You pivot. I grabbed my notebook and wrote, "Crisis acknowledged, response required." Simple, military language for something human. Later that week, I stayed late on base, after drill, watching Nadia spar with another soldier in the boxing ring. She spotted me lingering and called me in. "Get your gloves on, Captain." I shook my head. "Not today." "Exactly today," she snapped. "You look like hell, and you need to hit something." So I did. Gloves on, hands wrapped. I stepped in, and she didn't hold back. She jabbed hard, forcing me to move, forcing me to react. My lungs burned, arms ached, but with every punch, the weight lifted. The house, Kaylin's words, Ty's smirks, they dissolved into the rhythm of fists and footwork. When the round ended, I leaned on the ropes, chest heaving. Nadia smirked. "Feel better?" I nodded, sweat dripping down. "Yeah. Actually, yeah. Good. Don't bottle it up. It'll eat you alive." Naimus. Driving home that night, I realized the cracks in me weren't weakness, they were signals. Warnings that I needed to keep myself intact before I shattered. If I broke completely, they'd win. Back at the house, the kitchen light was on, Kaylin's voice carrying through the walls. She was on the phone with a friend, complaining about bills, about me, about how unreasonable I'd become. Her laugh was sharp, mean. I walked past without a word, upstairs to my room, closed the door, and exhaled. It wasn't worth a response. Not anymore. My silence was discipline, not defeat. That night, before bed, I wrote one last line. Soldier still standing. Enemy pressure acknowledged. Morale sustained. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even emotional. But it was enough to remind me, I wasn't just fighting to leave. I was fighting to stay myself. Sunday evening, I came back from the base, uniform jacket still folded neatly in the back seat, boots dusty from drill. The house smelled like reheated pasta and air freshener. I dropped my keys on the entry table, the clink echoing too loud in a place that never felt like home anymore. Mom was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. She didn't greet me. No. How was your day? No. Dinner's in the oven. Just the kind of silence that meant something was coming and it wasn't good. When I opened the fridge for water, she finally spoke. We need to talk about space in this house. I shut the fridge, bottle in hand, and faced her. Space? She sighed, like she was tired of playing polite. Your sister and Ty need more room. They're planning long-term. They need stability. I took a sip of water, slow, deliberate, and her eyes hardened. That means your room would be better used for them. The sentence hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I didn't move. I didn't yell. I just let the words settle. Then I said flatly, You're asking me to give up my room for them. No. I'm not asking, she corrected. I'm telling you it makes sense. You're barely here. You've got the military. You can figure something out. Kaylin needs it more. A sharp laugh escaped me before I could stop it. She needs it more? She's got a boyfriend living here for free. No bills, no responsibilities. And you think I'm the one who needs to figure things out? Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. You've always been independent, strong. You don't need as much as she does. She's starting her life. I set the water down, hard enough for the plastic to crack. I've been supporting this house for years. Bills, groceries, repairs, all of it. But sure, let's hand over my space to someone who hasn't contributed a dime. Her mouth pressed thin. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stepped closer, voice still calm but sharper now. Harder for who? For me, or for the people who can't survive without leaning on everyone else? She flinched but held her ground. We're a family. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. I shook my head. Sacrifices are mutual. This isn't mutual. This is you choosing convenience over respect. The silence after that was heavier than any shouting match. She didn't respond. She just picked up a dish towel and turned back to the counter like the conversation was finished. But for me, it was finished in a different way. Upstairs, I closed my door, leaned against it, and stared at the walls that had been mine since high school. Posters I never took down. Old trophies in a box under the bed. Memories embedded in drywall and carpet. And now my mother wanted to hand it over like it was nothing more than square footage. I sat on the bed, elbows on my knees, and breathed in slow. Anger was hot, but underneath it was something colder clarity. This was never going to change. They weren't going to suddenly appreciate me. They weren't going to value what I brought to the table. Every conversation ended with them taking, demanding, and twisting logic to make it sound reasonable. I pulled the folder from the drawer. The lease release sat inside, crisp and waiting. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their blessing. I already had the way out. At dinner, I didn't mention the confrontation. I sat across from Kaylin, who smiled smug while Ty shoveled food like he'd earned it. Dad made small talk about sports, pretending he didn't know what was brewing. Mom kept her eyes down, chewing slow. I ate in silence, every bite mechanical. Not angry anymore, not upset, just done. After the meal, Kaylin joked about how nice it would be to have more closet space. I looked her dead in the eye and said, You'll get what you want. Don't worry. Her smile faltered. Ty looked up, confused. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Dad cleared his throat and changed the subject. I carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it, dried my hands, and walked upstairs without another word. In my room, I opened my notebook and wrote one line. Request received. Response already in motion. The pen didn't shake. My handwriting was steady. Because for the first time, the decision wasn't emotional. It was tactical. They wanted me gone. My own mother had said it without hesitation. And she'd get what she wanted, just not in the way she thought. As I lay down that night, the house hummed with its usual sounds. Television downstairs, footsteps in the hall, muffled voices through thin walls. But it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt temporary. Already behind me, even as I breathed it in. And in that realization, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not anger, not sadness, control. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, long before anyone stirred. The house was quiet, only the faint hum of the fridge and the tick of the hallway clock keeping me company. I brewed coffee, poured a cup, and carried it upstairs. My desk was already cleared, papers stacked neatly. The folder from Bramley sat in the center like a loaded weapon. Legal, silent, undeniable. I pulled out the documents. The SCRA lease release, the letter Bramley signed, the base schedule that backed it all up. No arguments, no loopholes, no, but you can't. This was airtight. I slipped them into a large envelope, sealed it, and wrote one word across the front in thick black marker: notice. Downstairs, the kitchen table was cluttered as usual. Ty's empty soda can, Kaylin's abandoned spoon, a pile of unopened mail. I pushed it all to one side, wiped the surface clean with a paper towel, and set the envelope dead center, perfectly placed. Then I sat in the chair with my coffee and waited. One by one, the sounds of the house came alive. Dad's cough from the living room, Mom's shuffle in slippers, Kaylin's door creaking open, Ty's lazy footsteps behind hers. The smell of toast popped up from the toaster. Kaylin spotted it first, mid-yawn. "What's that?" she asked, pointing at the envelope. I sipped my coffee. "Open it." She raised a brow, slid into the chair opposite me, and ripped the flap. Her eyes skimmed the first page, confusion flashing before her smirk faded. "What is this?" "Paperwork," I said calmly. Mom entered just then, holding a mug of tea. "What paperwork?" Kaylin shoved the envelope toward her. Mom pulled out the documents, scanned the pages, and her lips parted. She looked up at me, face pale. "You're leaving?" I didn't blink. "Correct." Dad walked in, rubbing his neck, and caught the tail end. "Leaving? Where to?" "Studio apartment. Lease signed. Starting this week. Officially released from this one under military protections." The silence was thick. Kaylin broke it with a laugh that was more nervous than mocking. "Wait, you're actually serious? You're just gonna pack up and walk out?" "Yes," I said flatly. Ty shifted in his chair, uneasy now. "So, that's it? You're just gone?" "That's it." Mom set the papers down carefully, like they were fragile explosives. "Sloan, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I cut in. My tone wasn't angry. It was steady, surgical. Kaylin said it outright. "You sat there and let it hang. And last night, you told me to give up my room. So don't pretend this wasn't the plan." No one spoke. Dad scratched his temple like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Kaylin stared, mouth slightly open, stunned that her pokes finally hit stone. I stood, pushing the chair back smoothly. "This isn't a fight. It's a fact. I'll be gone by the end of the month." Kaylin scoffed, defensive again. "Good. Maybe the house will actually feel normal. Then," I smiled. Not warm, not sarcastic, just sharp. "Normal? You mean comfortable, with no one around to remind you what responsibility looks like." Her face flushed red. Ty looked away, suddenly fascinated with the table. Mom's voice cracked. "Sloan, please, we're family, we can work this out." "No," I said, cutting clean. "You wanted freedom from me. You'll get it, but don't dress it up as compromise." I picked up my mug, rinsed it in the sink, and placed it upside down on the drying rack. Every move deliberate, precise. The way you handle gear before deployment, organized, controlled, final. The rest of the day passed with the house in a strange limbo. Conversations were hushed, glances quick. Kaylin stomped around louder than usual. Ty vanished for hours. Dad buried himself in the television. Mom tried twice to corner me in the hallway, but I brushed past both times. There was nothing left to explain. Up in my room, I pulled out my duffel, laid it open on the bed, and started folding uniforms, rolling t-shirts, stacking socks. Each piece was muscle memory. Each fold was a step away from them. Halfway through, I stopped and sat on the bed, staring at the walls again. This time, though, there was no sting. Just a kind of clarity. They wanted me gone. Now they'd have exactly that. Before bed, I wrote my final line of the day. Orders executed, Departure in progress. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sad. It was simple. I dragged the duffel closer to the closet, the zipper wide open, swallowing up the last of my life in that house. Old sweatshirts, worn jeans, a stack of neatly folded uniforms, even the framed photo from boot camp that used to sit on my nightstand, everything got packed with the same rhythm. One fold, one roll, one stow. The sound of fabric brushing against itself was steadier than my breathing. Down the hall, the television blared. Some sitcom laugh track rose and fell while my family pretended life was normal downstairs. They hadn't asked about the envelope since I set it down. They hadn't asked about the duffel either. But I knew they saw it. The walls in that house were thin enough to hear through, thin enough to suffocate in. I pulled open the drawer of my nightstand and found the stack of receipts, groceries, electric bills, gas. I stared at them a moment before tossing them in the trash. No sense keeping proof of things they'd never acknowledge. The bills would go unpaid without me, but that was no longer my concern. The floor creaked. I turned. Dad stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, like he couldn't decide if he was coming in or retreating. "You're really doing it," he said quietly. I didn't stop folding. "Yeah." He nodded slowly. His eyes flicked to the duffel, then to me. "You know, I should say something here. Something fatherly. But I don't know what would even matter now." I looked at him for a beat, then back at the bag. Probably nothing. His jaw tightened. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and stepped back, leaving the door half open. Footsteps down the hall, then silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that half-open door. He had a chance. He almost spoke. But like always, he didn't. And silence was still a choice. Hours slipped by. I heard Kaylin's laugh through the floor, Ty's deeper voice underneath, plates clinking in the sink, Mom's voice telling someone to turn the volume down. The sounds of a house I'd grown up in, but no longer belonged to. I zipped the duffel shut and dragged it to the corner. My boots were lined up beside it, laces loose, ready for morning. When the clock hit midnight, the house finally went still. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlight outside casting faint stripes across the walls. The same ceiling I'd stared at as a kid, imagining a future bigger than Dayton. The same ceiling I'd stared at as a teenager, dreaming about getting out. And now, it was just drywall above me, empty, meaningless. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't feel anything sharp anymore. Just a cold, steady hum in my chest. The silence stretched until sleep finally took me. Boots still on the floor, bag waiting like a soldier at attention. Morning would come fast. And when it did, I wouldn't be here. The alarm on my phone buzzed at 5:30 a.m. I didn't hit snooze. My eyes were already open, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The same ceiling I'd left behind in my mind days ago. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the floor cool under my bare feet, and sat there for a moment, letting the weight of the morning settle. The duffel was ready, boots lined up beside it. I laced them tight, double-knotted, the same way I did before a ruck march. Nothing about it felt sentimental, it was just preparation. I pulled on a plain gray t-shirt, zipped up a light jacket, and hoisted the duffel over my shoulder. The sound of the zipper teeth shifting against the strap was loud in the silence. Downstairs, the house was still. No television, no voices, no footsteps. Just the faint smell of yesterday's leftovers in the trash. I set the duffel by the door, walked into the kitchen, and poured the last of the coffee into a travel mug. The cabinets squeaked the way they always had, the faucet dripped the way it always did, and for the first time I realized none of it was my problem anymore. When I turned back toward the table, Dad was standing in the hallway, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His hair was messy, his eyes heavy with sleep. For a second, I thought he might actually say something different this time. He didn't. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded once, eyes darting to the floor. His lips moved like he wanted to form another sentence, but nothing came. After a long pause, he muttered, "Take care of yourself," and turned toward the living room. That was it. Years of raising me, watching me carry this house on my back, and that was all he had left. I slung the duffel higher and opened the front door. The hinges squeaked, a sound I knew too well. Behind me, the stairs creaked. Kaylin. She patted down in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, Ty trailing behind her with his hair sticking up. She squinted at the bag in my hand, then at me. "So, you're really leaving," she said, voice groggy but sharp. "Yeah." Her mouth curled into that familiar smirk. "Don't forget you chose this." I let the corner of my mouth lift, not in agreement but in dismissal. "No, you did." Ty shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Mom appeared at the top of the stairs, hand gripping the railing, staring down at me like she couldn't quite believe it was happening even after all the warnings. Her face was tight, lips pressed together. She didn't say a word. I stepped onto the porch, the morning air crisp against my skin. The sky was streaked with pale orange, the world quiet except for a dog barking a few houses away. My boots hit the driveway with steady thuds, every step measured. There were no goodbyes, no hugs, no last-minute pleas. Just silence behind me and freedom in front of me. The car door opened with a familiar creak. The engine started on the first turn, and I pulled out of that driveway without looking in the rearview mirror. The street I'd driven down thousands of times before felt different now, like it wasn't mine anymore. Every mailbox, every cracked sidewalk, every neighbor's porch light was just scenery I was passing through. My hands gripped the steering wheel steady, and for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. By the time the house was out of sight, it was already behind me in more ways than one. I didn't need closure. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them. All I needed was the road ahead. The studio apartment smelled faintly of new paint and old carpet glue. It wasn't big, just one room with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and a window that faced the street, but it was mine. The duffel hit the floor with a thud, and I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, looking around at the emptiness. No clutter, no noise, no voices cutting into my thoughts, just space. I opened the window and let the morning air roll in. Cars passed on the street below. A siren wailed in the distance, and for once the chaos outside felt less suffocating than the silence I'd left behind. I stretched, cracked my shoulders, and laughed under my breath. The laugh wasn't bitter, wasn't forced, it was real. The first thing I unpacked wasn't clothes or kitchenware. It was the notebook I'd been scribbling in for weeks. I flipped to the last page, where I'd written, "Orders executed. Departure in progress." I crossed it out with one bold line and wrote, "Mission complete. Status. Free." A knock rattled the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find the landlord, Joe Bramley, holding a set of spare keys and a stack of paperwork. He grinned. "Figured you'd need these. Place is all yours now." I signed where he pointed, handed back the papers, and thanked him. He nodded and left, leaving me alone again, the keys warm in my palm. They felt heavier than they should have, heavier, but in the best way. I spent the next hour unpacking the basics. Uniforms neatly hung in the closet. Coffee maker plugged in on the counter. Boots lined up by the door, ready. The space filled slowly, not with noise or tension, but with order. My order. By noon, I was sitting at the tiny table with a sandwich and a glass of water when my phone buzzed. Kaylin's name flashed on the screen. For a second, I just stared at it. My thumb hovered over the green button, then slid and hit decline. The screen went dark, silent. A minute later, it buzzed again. Voicemail. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. Whatever excuse, whatever jab, whatever plea she had, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Instead, I leaned back, chewed my sandwich, and looked around at the apartment again. The quiet wasn't heavy here. It was steady, solid, mine. Later that evening, I drove back to base. Training ran long, but I didn't mind. The gym, the drills, the structure. It all felt sharper now, easier to breathe in. I wasn't splitting myself between two battlefields anymore. I wasn't carrying dead weight disguised as family obligations. Afterward, Nadia caught me in the parking lot, tossing her gym bag into her car. "You look different," she said, squinting at me. "Do I?" "Yeah. Lighter. Like somebody finally cut the rope off your shoulders." I smiled. "Something like that." I'm Sprat. Back in the apartment that night, I sat at the desk with the notebook open again. This time, I didn't write orders or status reports. I just wrote one line. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards and left. It wasn't a battle cry. It wasn't revenge written in flames. It was just truth, plain and steady, the kind that doesn't need explanation. The apartment was quiet. The world outside kept moving, And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to fight to exist. I was free. On my terms. Looking back, I realized leaving wasn't about punishment, it was about clarity. My sister thought pushing me out would weaken me, but it did the opposite. Walking away stripped me of noise and handed me freedom. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped building them for people who stood back and watched while I carried the weight alone. The truth is simple. Family isn't who shares your roof. Family is who stands beside you when you're in the fight. And once I stopped confusing the two, I stopped needing their approval. I built my own space, on my own terms, with my own standards. I didn't slam the door when I left, I just closed it behind me. And sometimes that's the sharpest form of revenge there is.